So welcome, Brian. It's great to have you with me this morning. So this is our Leadership Stories podcast, and our first series is talking with senior leaders across the system. When we went out to the Leading to Change audience and said, what would you like to hear about? Who would you like to hear from? We had a range of answers, but senior leaders came out as people we don't often get a chance to hear from as real people. So not just in a position, but actually, what is leadership to you? What does leadership mean to you? How has your career come to this point? Did you ever expect to be chief executive of an NHS board? And also, what are the challenges that you see in our system at the moment? What's your toughest challenge been? And who's inspired you? So these are some of the things we're going to talk about in our conversation today. So welcome.
Thanks, Sarah.
So you are Chief Executive Officer for NHS Shetland. How did you get to that post? What's your career look like?
So I'm a little bit of a strange fish in the fact that I have 20 years of military experience prior to joining the NHS. So I started off my journey as a dentist, as a dental student in Dundee. And I graduated in the Navy, paid me through 3 years of university, and I went straight into the Navy in 1997. And I kind of really started to embrace the leadership journey, I think, quite early on. So I had some real good opportunities to go to sea, to go on leadership courses, and to really start to really feel what is the thread that's going to make me a better officer and a better leader. So that kind of journey really came to fruition in 2004 when I went to the Defence Academy to do the Advanced Command and Staff course, which is a year-long leadership course and command course in Shrivenham at the Defence Academy. And I think that's where I really started to grow. It was a tough journey, being a dentist, coming into an environment with 300 other Army, Navy, Air Force officers who had just come back from Iraq, Afghanistan, lots of war stories, imposter syndrome. I'm a dentist, what am I doing here? So that was probably one of the biggest challenges, actually, to get equity of perspective and equity of right to be there in a way, maybe in my head, but certainly by the end of the course, I'd really developed and grown, and it led me on to 2 or 3 operational tours with the military, and my military career culminated with a lovely 3 years in Brunei, working for the Sultan of Brunei, and being a dentist out in Brunei. But I think it was at that stage, 3 years away from the UK, young family, what did I want to do? And that's when we made the decision to move to Shetland and to join the NHS. So I joined initially as the dental officer, then dental director, chief officer, medical director, chief officer, and then now chief executive. So that's how I've got there.
In a nutshell, there's quite a lot of big roles there towards the end of that. But first of all, tell me, Brian, you talk there about how do you get equity in there with all these proper servicemen? Is that the kind of, or the guys who've been in the really dangerous places? And how did you go about trying to achieve that? Or how did you try to align yourself into that space? Because that's a big ask.
So I think there was a bit of humility maybe and vulnerability, definitely, round about knowing that you don't know everything. It's a bit like the Rumsfeld, you don't know what you don't know, and certainly that's how I felt, going into that environment. But I think also listening and learning and coming with a really open mind and to be challenged, and that's okay. That challenge and the challenge of your perspectives. But then I think where I grew was, as I was learning, I was then able to put that challenge back. And that's where the equity maybe started to come, was that actually, my perspective was well thought out. It had a different perspective maybe than other officers would have. And I think then the penny suddenly dropped that, we are a wide band of brothers in the military. And that's, I think, part of the role of maybe being someone like a dental officer in those kind of leadership courses is you will bring a different perspective. And it really is round about just being confident, or that confidence growing once you start to find your feet.
That's really interesting that you say that. So it sounds like we're back to relationships. It's about getting to know people and building that trust and that challenge. What do you think it is that maybe you got from a military background that you may not have got elsewhere when you consider your leadership?
Opportunities to lead under pressure, I think, is a big one. Certainly, when I went out to Iraq, I was working in the headquarters and leading, a team of planners, as well as, collaboratively helping out support the medical effort in southeast Iraq at that stage. Bahrain in the Middle East was the same, working in a maritime headquarters and having a real good input of strategic direction, strategic planning, those kind of aspects as well. So I think there was really good opportunities. Opportunities to learn as well about leadership. I think learning about good leadership and bad leadership. I had some bad leaders. They were fewer than the good leaders, I have to say. But you have to have that appreciation of what works for you and to be able to learn off the good and the bad. And I think that was also a kind of opportunity. So the different types of leadership that you see, you probably see that expressed quite a bit more in the military and learning off that.
That's really interesting. So if we think a bit more now about what kind of leader you want to be, how you want to show up and what you think good leadership looks like, how much of that has come from, I don't want to be like those leaders?
It's just funny, I asked my wife this morning on the way out the door, where have I changed in a leadership role, because she's seen me evolve, especially evolve from a military background into an NHS kind of background now. And it was about the empathy, she said, empathy, people, becoming people-focused and not task-focused. So I think that is probably what I learnt of the good leaders is, and I always say this is my mantra, it's all about the relationships. You've touched on that already, and I think the Navy in a way really allowed you to flourish in how to build relationships. You're going on a ship for a year away, you've got to build relationships pretty quick, and there will be different types of relationships. There will be people you'll just have a touch point once a day, and then you'll have friends that will grow into friendship during that. So I think that was probably set me on a really good front foot round about the importance of relationships. But then I think I got that from maybe then getting the best out of people. Was probably some of that growth, and that is round about maybe being a bit more emotionally intelligent. I think certainly my last kind of boss, senior leader out in Brunei, was a master at emotional intelligence and relationships, both up the hierarchy, but certainly down into his team as well. And I think I learned a lot of that kind of humility in leadership as well.
So coming from the military experience that you have before coming across into NHS social and health services, what is it you felt that you learnt from the military that you may not have got elsewhere?
So I think I have the mantra of leadership's all about the relationships, and I think the Navy taught me very well how to build relationships. Going on a ship for a year at a time, you have to build relationships very quickly, and there'll be different depths of relationship. There'll be those you maybe have a touch point once a day on a ship, but you'll also have those that you have a growing friendship, and that becomes a deeper kind of relationship as well. So I think there was that kind of ability to build relationships, but also I think my last job in the military was out in Brunei, working with a fantastic senior leader who's head of the dental services out there, and taught me a lot about emotional intelligence, understanding people, and relationships, both up the hierarchy but also down into his team as well. He was a very humble leader and a real people person, and I learned a lot about that, and I think that would probably be the last stance that I took maybe from the military into the NHS, round about the relationships and the people, empathy, emotional intelligence, and meeting people where they are. I think also as well, the humility bit is, I think, a really important change in my leadership journey. there is a touch of arrogance that maybe comes in, especially junior into senior kind of leadership in the military, that is maybe youthfulness. It might be just feeling of uniqueness in what you're doing. But I think I had to shake that off, and I think that was probably something on my journey that probably made me a little bit less authentic than I would want to have been if I was to look back from the eyes now. I would say that arrogance probably did not help my authenticity as a leader as well. So I think there, an reflection point, and I think this podcast is great to allow me to reflect back on where you maybe got it right, where you've maybe got it wrong, but where you've maybe learned and put up things a little bit better in that journey.
I'm interested in what you say about that arrogance getting in the way. Did somebody point that out to you, or is that something that you worked out for yourself?
I think I worked it out myself, but in hindsight, I'm sure there were people saying that at the time, but maybe just, weren't brave enough to say it to my face. But yeah, I think it was something I had to just reset, and I think that was the 3 years in Brunei. Out with a young family, your perspectives change, and I think that was just a really good, lucky 3 years that I had a little bit of a break away from what I'd been doing as a normal tempo in work to doing something a little bit different that allowed me a bit of space just around me to just maybe gather thoughts, perspectives, and then move on to the next challenge.
And so thinking about how you want to show up as a leader, can you tell me a bit more about the difference in the relationships that you have? Because we're used to the conversation, aren't we, about it's all about relationships, compassionate, collaborative, collective. See the person in front of you, not the role or the performance issue or the uniform, if you like. But often we don't take that to the next stage, which is we do see leaders that have one way of forming a relationship with everybody, don't they, regardless. And there's maybe this idea that, well, I'm being authentic and I'm being consistent because I treat everybody the same way. But actually you raise a really interesting point. To some people you will have an occasional touch point, or you will have very in-depth conversations. And in some cases we do. We find really good lifelong friends at work, which is a joy and a privilege. What do you think it is, or how do you approach the difference between relationships? What should we be thinking about?
I think your values is a good starting point, and maybe how your values link to other people's values as well. I think one of my values is building trust. So, consistency you talk about there is part of that link to build trust. Competency and abilities, another one. And I think being that authentic kind of leader as well, and people knowing what your values are, and probably knowing when they're touching on your values or pushing your values is also part of that relationship as well. So I think for me, in my leadership, I would hope that most of people who work with me, around me, and support me would know what my values are, and would know what that means to me as a leader as well. I think it's also understanding relationships are two-way avenues, so meeting people where they are, listening to understand, and it's okay to be challenged, and it's okay not to get it right, and it's okay not to have the idea, and that's really important as well for me, is about empowerment of people, and it's not the leader's role to do everything and to have all the ideas and things like that as well. It's about how you push that leadership down. We call it mission command in the Navy, where you have that idea, and at a strategic level, and then all the commanders underneath work to that same idea and that plan, pulling together their own plans and what is their purpose in the grand plan as well. So, I think that was a good learning from the Navy as well, is about empowerment and understanding that you need the worker bees underneath to be leaders as well, as, it's not just at the highest level of an organisation you have leadership.
So does that sound like what we might refer to these days, or in our circumstances, as collective leadership? So we have the strategy point, or the idea as you refer to it, which is a really nice way of talking about it, at the to strategic top level, and then the freedom given, the responsibility, the empowerment, as you say there, to you work out what this looks like in your space with the people you have and the services you're trying to provide and the resources you have available. Would that, if we were trying to think of a non-military word for it, is collective leadership what we're talking about there, or is it something else?
No, I would say that's a good assimilation of what mission command is. I would say probably in the more modern terms, there's a little bit more ability, I think, to speak to power. In that collaborative space, I think there is more of an ability to say, we don't think this will work, or we don't think that's in the art of the possible. And I think that's a development, I think, that we have in sort of modern leadership. I would hope, in the fact that, it is that two-way conversation, because, as I say, that's why we build the relationships, is that we have that honesty and that conversation point and that communication point as well, is that we can we're empowered to speak freely and have those conversations.
And that's bringing me to think around, again, very hot topic in leadership for the last 5 to 10 years now, the psychological safety element. We think Amy Edmondson and her work with others around that space. It's interesting how, if we want to be able to speak to power or encourage people to speak to power so that we know what's really going on, we know what those issues are, things that link into the work with civility saves lives, etc. It does require the relationship first. To what extent do you think people feel they can speak truth to power if there is no existing relationship, or a very little or a slightly fragile existing relationship in that space?
I think it's very difficult, and it comes back to that trust element as well. So another element of trust is vulnerability. So trust is vulnerability and risk, and how vulnerable you're willing to let yourself be, and the risks you're willing to take is part of that trust equation. So I think if that trust isn't there, then you're not willing to be vulnerable, and the risk is too high, and I think that stifles that conversation. And I think myself as a senior leader, I have a role to play in when that conversation's happening, is, as we say in Shetland, pin back the lugs and listen, and listen to what's been said, listen to understand, and to get into the middle of what perspective's been put forward and why. And that again is that two-way relationship of when someone is speaking, you listen. You might not agree, or you might want to challenge, but you've got to listen to understand first why that point has come. And I think that also helps. That trust and that safe space certainly is I'm a big fan of spaces for listening.
Yes,
yeah, a big fan of that. We have a variety of sessions in Shetland round about people just being empowered to speak and people being empowered to listen. And I think it's a skill that I've probably learnt through my journey. So I was very blessed to work with Bridget, for Leadership Cubed, and got exposure to the spaces for listening. And I think as a leader, that's brought on a skill that probably we need to do on a daily basis, just listening and listening to understand. So
what's coming to mind there, we think of the Edgar Schein book, Humble Inquiry, with this idea that you listen expecting to learn something you didn't already know about the situation or the person, which of course goes back, if you prefer, the granddaddy, if you like, of some of the management, Stephen Covey, and that listening to seek to understand before being understood. All of these things coming together, and you've even managed to bring us back to Brené Brown as well, with the vulnerability and building trust, but also with setting your boundaries. So what are you comfortable in stepping into, and what feels too scary or too risky at this time? So we're ticking off all of the book list, Brian. You're doing a fantastic job.
I think just when we're talking about coming from a medical background as well, is often we listen to diagnose and fix.
Oh, that's great.
And that's often a skill, in itself, of being a clinician. But when you step into maybe that leadership role, is that the right type of listening that needs to happen, or is it listening to understand? So I just threw that in there as well, coming from a medical background. I used to sitting out patients, listen to patients speaking, and I was just wondering, how do I fix you? How do I fix you? This is all I'm trying to do, rather than actually listening to understand why that person's there.
What's been your toughest leadership challenge personally?
I think for me, there was a little bit roundabout when I joined the NHS, how did my leadership experience up to then, was it the right leadership experience to move forward in the NHS? So I think there was kind of a little bit of time just trying to find my feet round about what leadership was, and was it any different? Was it the same? Those kind of, I think, new environments and what that brings. I remember when I was onboarding for Leadership Cubed, the wonderful Jenny Jones challenged me, and she said, "What is your purpose?" And that was a really powerful question. I couldn't answer that. I sat there on board and I could not answer. And it took me that Leadership Cube journey and having the wonderful team from NES round about that kind of journey to support you, to find purpose, to find your leadership values, and to then start to, I think, put them into practice as well. So I think that was quite a challenge as well, was being challenged on your leadership journey to really get some depth into what it is to be a senior leader in an organisation or in across a system as well. So I think transforming maybe from the self, the team and the system leadership, I think has been a bit of a journey as well. I think we're really good sometimes at the team and often the system leadership, but we forget about the self leadership and what that means, and looking after yourself and self-care, resilience, all those kind of aspects. And I suppose coming back from Iraq, I probably ignored that element of leadership, and I did have some mental health problems, and I felt that that was a big learning curve as well, was roundabout. How do you build resilience? And I'm very lucky now. I've focused on that area of leadership, and I would say I'm probably very resilient. That certainly comes back on a lot of my sort of psychometrics and things like that now, because I think I've been there. I think I know how low you can go, and that was a big challenge, I think, on my leadership journey, was that self leadership and really getting to grips with that.
So can I ask, do you have someone, or do you have a network, or maybe members of that old cohort who you keep in touch with to help you reconnect, to kind of keep you honest almost about that? Because it's something that you can almost feel like you've fixed and it's okay. And then if you don't keep on top of it, or you don't get people asking, how are things going, or what are you doing about this, you don't know that the wheels have fallen off until the wheels have fallen off again.
Mm-hmm. So certainly through COVID, our cohort was undertaking the live work element of our Leadership Cubed. And that was really about how we sustained each other as a team during a pandemic. It was meant to be something completely different, but come March 2020, things changed, and we took a different stance. And I felt that was so supportive, having those elements of support just around you when you're going through the toughest of times. I suppose in a way, I'm very blessed in Shetland that we have a few people that have been through Leading for Change, or particularly Leadership Cubed as well. So Kirsty Brightwell, our medical director up there, she's a great kind of colleague in challenging the leadership kind of boundaries, having these kind of conversations, keeping it real, and keeping your leadership real as well. So I think it is your point, being who supports the leadership is a really important one, because you can't do it alone. You always need that system check, I think, and that touch point around about where am I at, and where am I at on the self-team kind of system basis as well, because it's a lot to balance out those three areas when you're in senior leadership as well.
Yeah. So you've clearly made some good friends and met some great leaders along your journey. Has any one of them in particular inspired you, or is there maybe a world leader, or a more famous leader, for want of a better phrase, who really inspires you?
So from my military days, I served in HMS Albion, and we took Albion out of build, and we had a variety of problems with the ship just getting through its initial sea trials and sea testing. And we had a commander who's the captain's right-hand officer. he had joined in the most testing of times when we were sort of extending our sea trials period. Morale was really low, and it was a really tough time for the ship's company. And just seeing how he came along and he instigated fireside chats for the officers to sort of put some leadership around what our purpose, and as well as how he interacted with the rest of the ship's company, how hard he worked to build relationships right through very quickly, and how he really steered us with the captain, through the most horrid times, picking up morale, culminating in a trip to New Orleans. It was from low to absolute high, and it was through that leadership that I experienced there. So that would certainly be one of the leaders that I would always reflect back on, just how he brought a perspective that was missing, but was able to enact that and empower people and to get everybody rallying around a common purpose, and that was really powerful.
That's really interesting to listen to, and that I can hear what you're saying and how that would have been, not just to be around that individual, but to see the impact. How many people would be on a ship at that time? You say the company, how many people is that?
About 300.
That's like a huge amount then. So it's a lot of people to impact in that way. And that for that morale can spread, whether it be low or high, can't it? So that's a really significant impact to make. Tell me a bit more about fireside chats. On a ship, that sounds quite dangerous. So what's a fireside chat look like?
So it's just a gathering in our wardroom, which is the mess area for officers to relax, and he would often get us in the evening before dinner, and just sit and talk about leadership, talk about his expectations of us as part of his leadership team, talk about blockages maybe and why we weren't performing as leaders, and maybe just hearing some of his experience about when things weren't going well, how we've turned. There's a famous book, Turn the Ship Around. Yes. It was those kind of aspects of how do we turn the ship around? What do we need to change in our leadership style and our engagement with the people that we work with and lead? How do we turn the ship around? And it was those kind of conversations. And it's interesting. We've just done some interviews up in Shetland, and I was involved in that, and they said, well, we'll maybe do a chief executive interview with the individual, and I've said, no, I want a fireside chat because I want to get into the nub of someone rather than it being an interview aspect, is just having a conversation about, why, what's your purpose, all those kind of questions that you can't really get out in an interview, but you can get out in a conversation. It's even start of that, building a relationship is really just getting understanding someone's perspective.
I'm smiling because the number of national programmes and book clubs that we've used Turn the Ship Around with David Marquet's book, and I'm smiling because I think that's the first time I've heard somebody say that it was used on another ship, if you like. Yeah. Of course, it's based in a submarine, and so it's nice to hear it's gone there as well as other places too. You've mentioned purpose a number of times now, and so I'm going to ask you, what is your purpose?
So I think my purpose now is to provide senior systems leadership to a remote and rural community, to be an advocate for that community, and to be that link between provision of health and care and social care as well. We have a big role to play in that as well as a health board, and getting people to understand the island nuances that we have up in Shetland, and the differences of need and the differences of the community up there and what that means. So I think it's really important that my leadership isn't just about an organisation, it's about a community as well.
Can you tell me a little bit more about, you mentioned there, and social care? Because often, just with the busyness or the complexity, we see health, we see social care, we see social work, and we see other things separately. What to you is the key connection or the key importance of talking about social care in the same sentence as health?
I think it's very important. I don't think, and you're speaking to someone who was a chief officer of an IJB, so I'm obviously going to come with that integrated head. But we made, I think, good steps forward in our integration up in Shetland. Certainly since 2014 when we had the Act come in. And I think recently we've been working a lot closer, especially during the pandemic. And just a small system has to work together, these economies of effort, and I think that has brought us closer together and more collaborative kind of working. So I think we can't in our system just speak about a local authority or a health board. I think it's talking about Shetland PLC and our purpose for the people that we serve.
So that leads us quite nicely on to the big question, if you like. What, in your view, at this time, is the biggest leadership challenge we have?
So I think it's around about the VUCA environment that we're working in at the minute, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity and the ambiguity. I think that complexity is increasing. I think we have challenges across the services we're trying to provide with the resources that we have to provide them with. I think we're also managing a huge expectation in what health and care is across our national kind of system. And I think just moving forward, I think it's going to take a lot of collaborative leadership to get people on the same page to find out how we move forward. And I think that's going to be the real big challenge is getting people onto that page, but also the tempo that needs to occur. The change is happening now. The change is happening very rapidly. And I worry that what we're trying to strive for isn't in the art of the possible in the time frame that we've got. So I think that's going to be a big challenge of, we say about creating space, holding space. That's the part. Systems leadership is about holding space. How long do we have to hold that space for to get us in the right direction and to nudge on with the actions that need to be done?
So when you say the tempo and change is happening, is that are we running the risk of being left behind? Or is it the other side that we're trying to move too fast and maybe we're missing things, or we don't do it well, or we don't do it in a connected enough way?
I think that's a complexity, because I think it's a bit of both. So when we look at the digital and innovation and the technological kind of aspects, how quickly can we innovate and get that innovation working in our organisations? So there's risk of being left behind, I feel, in some of those areas. But then in other areas where we're trying to induce change so quickly that maybe we haven't squared all the circles, and I think that's also risk. But if you know that is the risk, then you can sort of mitigate some of that moving forward. If you know where your blind spots are to some degree, but it's whether you can rectify that as well at the tempo, or you're going to go too far too quick, and then that regain is going to be really difficult as well. So I do think it's a bit of both, and that's the complexity we're working in, is that it's so volatile, and I mean volatility in a positive way, with innovation coming in, with changes to how we're working, but there's also volatility maybe in changes where we're not working, and those gaps are opening up as well.
What would you like to see move in your space up in Shetland in the next, say, 5 years? What would you like to see that would be different in 5 years' time?
I think I would like to see our integrated system come even further on. I'd like to see us really rising to the challenges that are there, whether it be the resource challenge, the workforce challenge, or the innovative kind of challenge as well. But to do that in a collaborative way, to move the system along in balance, rather than in panic. So I think it's maybe for me, it's about just holding that space for the teams to be empowered to make the change. Those people that do the change, live the change, that kind of aspect as well. So, I think it's really important that we're bringing the staff and the organisation on at the same time. I can't do it on my own. And I've always said to my staff, nor do I want to. They are the most important bit in the change. And it's a change not just for the organisation, but it's a change for our community as well.
Brian, it has been so good to speak with you today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing your leadership story. Thank you.